deal with the elephant in the room. A bit later on, we're going to be...
That's you, Kwasi. That's you. You're the elephant.
All right. Well, certainly to the cognoscenti, anyway, politically. We're going to be interviewing Anthony Seldon, who's written another biography of another Prime Minister, Truss at number 10. We'll be talking to him later in the programme. One of his more electrifying claims is that after your budget, the one that you ended up getting sacked for and she ended up losing her job for, after that, when it was obvious that there was a big problem financially, she, Liz Truss, as Prime Minister, actively considered stopping all treatment of cancer on the NHS for a year to fill the black hole of money, and that you might have been involved in that conversation. Can you shed any light on that?
I wasn't involved in any conversation like that, because it's certainly a conversation that I would remember.
Isn't it? Yeah.
I also don't think that, as I recall, I don't think that was ever proposed as a serious...
You don't remember that as a conversation?
No, I don't think it was proposed as a serious policy alternative.
I suppose what it does is speak to a sense of desperation that after the mini-budget, after the promises of tax cuts, you know, was there any sense that extreme things were being looked at?
I think lots of things were being looked at. What happened was that the OBR basically said there was a 70 billion hole.
Right.
And I always said...
of budget responsibility.
That's right. Yeah. And I always said that if the government survived to the new year, that hole would disappear because the energy price intervention would go down because prices were going to come down. And also the tax receipts were going to be higher because of inflation and the fact that the thresholds, you know, at 50,000 and the other thresholds were staying the same. So, and that's what happened. In the end, the black hole was much reduced.
To what?
But when it was about 30 billion in the end. Okay. But what caused the shock was the 70 billion. And as a consequence of that, what the government was trying to do was to find savings to close that gap. And that's where a lot of that comes. I haven't read the book, but I've spoken to Anthony Seldon, and I think he generally does a good job. I've read some of his other books.
It's also suggested in his, certainly, that, and we're going to speak to Anthony Seldon later, but it sort of paints you as having a relationship with Liz Truss where she basically demanded something, asked you to do it, and you sort of had to do it. It doesn't feel like it was very...
Consensual.
No.
Well, look,
consensual is one way of looking at it.
The way government works is she, particularly in that case, she'd won the Tory leadership on a very clear economic campaign. That was what distinguished her from Rishi Sunak. She was going to reduce taxes. Yes. And so my view was that because she had the mandate, not the general election mandate, but she had the mandate from the members, she was elected, she'd gone around the country and got their votes. I hadn't. She was very much the person that had the mandate among the party members to run the government. Yeah. And my job was to try and facilitate her vision. That was my general approach.
OK, well...
I mean, Liz Truss does say that it's completely untrue, that she ever considered this at all.
I don't believe the cancer thing. I don't believe that.
Yeah,
let's give
in every
the official
way.
response.
Sorry.
In response to these claims, made about very strong claims, alleged plans to cut NHS cancer care completely, to stop it dead. A spokesman for Liz Truss has said to this programme, it's totally untrue, she never considered it. OK, let's move on.
So, well, actually, before we can, there's a couple of other things I'd be interested in. She says that... even though it's not massively flattering, the book, he still believes that Liz Truss was a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson.
Well, I don't know how you can judge the two. I mean, it was such a short time. I think she had some qualities that were better suited to the job. But again, I think Boris, as a campaigner and as a communicator, had great skills as well.
Do you think Boris will ever come back?
I think I wouldn't rule it out. You can never say never in politics.
Do you think Truss will ever come back?
Again, you
surely
can't
you
rule
can
it
say
out.
never.
Well, it's difficult. I mean, the hurdle that she has is that she went into the general election and she lost her seat. Yeah. So she'll have to be re-adopted.
I think the first person to do that since the 30s.
I think Ramsay MacDonald lost his seat as Prime Minister.
Well, that's
former Prime Minister.
That's a real signature on the story.
I mean, Kieran, were you hearing rumours of extreme things? Did you hear anything like the cancer thing that Truss has denied?
I wasn't reporting in the UK at the time, but I have spoken to people who were in that room where this was discussed, and I do have a sense of what exactly the conversation was. which is what had happened. As Kwasi says, there was a £70 billion forecast black hole. And nobody thought, in number 10 and the Treasury, that Liz Truss was taking it seriously enough.
Right.
She thought she could just carry on and get through this kind of short-term pain.
Well, rather, as you described, Kwasi, that by for the new year...
They revised the number.
Yeah.
I could see that was going to happen, and that's what did happen.
And the problem is the officials were hearing this kind of thing from Kwasi and from Liz Truss herself and thinking they don't understand the scale of the problem. So from what I'm told, the Treasury produced the document of saying this is what it would take to close the black hole. And on there was eliminating cancer care from the NHS. The point was not this is something we should do. The point is this is how seriously you have to take the problem. And I think it's really interesting for me listening to Kwasi talk about it.
So it was like, this is how drastic the situation is.
As it happened, they did write down the numbers through no policy.
But also, as it happened, they unwound a lot of the measures in your budget.
True. That's true.
And that's what they really wanted to happen.
That's what they wanted to happen.
To say,
exactly right.
We'll put back up corporations.
So you're quite right. That's how they would put these things and say, unless you do A, B, and C and reverse.
That was
A,
the
B,
real
C,
point. Unless you reverse your budget,
this
is what
we're that's where the thing was reversed, and I was sacked.
Yeah.
Largely as a consequence of that.
OK, well, that was then. Let's move on to the now. Let me read you two messages we've had. These are typical from thousands of you who've been contacting us over the last half hour. Joyanne on Twitter says, it's ridiculous to propose banning smoking in outdoor areas. It should be up to the individual, not the government. And on the other side, Anita says, I totally agree with this ban. You get great weather. You want to make the most of eating outdoors. Why should you suck in someone else's smoke while drinking or eating outside?
So this refers to a leaked document seen by The Sun. There we go, front page of The Sun, also reported elsewhere.
Good headline.
It's a good headline. No cigarettes and alcohol. Oh, my goodness.
What do you mean, because of Oasis?
And particularly pub gardens, children's play areas, outside stadiums, as Richard said. Sensible because smoking kills, or nanny state gone crazy?
So my view is always generally on the side of nanny state gone crazy. And my worry about it is that actually it'll lead to a lot of closures of pubs. There are still people who go to pub gardens.
That's what Nigel Farage has said. You're in agreement with him. End of the pub.
And as a consequence of the ban, lots of pubs, I mean, you will know locally, lots of pubs around you, around where you grew up, that have just simply shut up shop. And that's a concern as well. So
because people can't smoke anywhere, they won't gather in those places anymore.
And ultimately, I think the leaked note suggested this. I think it's going to be a prelude to a general ban on smoking.
Well, there is a general ban
over the next 10, 15 years.
I think
it's coming down the line.
The wind's blowing,
But there is a ban on smoking, and this government has said that they're going to get... This was Rishi Sunak's idea, you know, to have this phased ban of smoking. Each year, the ban would rise by
But that seemed to me... I mean, I was an MP at the time, and I said to my whip, I don't agree with this, because it seems totally unenforceable.
Why?
I mean, the idea that...
Well, we enforce smoking bans in other areas, like in cinemas, on aeroplanes.
Yeah, so the difference with the age ban, so essentially the proposal was that people born after, I think, the 1st of January 2009 would never be able to get cigarettes. Now, when those guys get... Legally. When they get to 30, I mean, it's a devil of a job distinguishing who's 18 and who isn't. But distinguishing between who's 32 and who's 31.
Well, and at some point it's between people who are 82.
I think the hope would be by then they hadn't got addicted.
I think what would really happen is that shops would simply stop selling cigarettes, because you're not going to want to enforce a ban that comes in age 66, are you?
No.
I think the point is, after a few years of this...
Why do you have this rolling...
Well, I guess the argument at the time, and, you know, and it looks like this government's going to continue with it, although they haven't confirmed it yet, have they, is that as people get older, you're giving chance for older people that are addicted to, you know...
It's difficult to take something away that people are actually addicted to and has been legal.
Whereas you stop people starting. I mean, Sajid Javid, I think, proposed this, didn't he, as well, this idea of smoking outside.
Yes.
But Boris Johnson stepped in and said no, famous sort of libertarian.
My question is, how many people still smoke in pub gardens? I mean, I don't see a lot.
They do.
I'm thinking of my local pub,
I see a lot
which has
of
a big garden. And you go there on a summer's day, and I'd say probably 25 to 30% of the patrons are there specifically so they can have a drag.
Right. Is it smoking or is it vaping as well?
Smoking.
Smoking. So I think it's smoking. I think Richard's right. I think if you go outside the M25, certainly in my constituency, and I went to pubs, you know, and they had a garden, lots of people were smoking. It wasn't something that you never saw. And a lot of people went there specifically to smoke because they weren't allowed to smoke at home for whatever reason. and they could meet their friends and have a cigarette.
I think it would be really interesting to see actually what approach this government takes to vaping, because the messages on that have been really mixed over several governments. And nobody knows whether this is the solution to smoking or whether it's actually getting people into
It certainly
smoking.
proved the solution to flipping from cigarettes to vaping. But whether it's
has
a
it also
solution to the
attracted a
health
lot of
cause,
young people?
a lot of young
who
people.
But
might
the
not
other thing you've got to
otherwise,
remember, you know, with a sort of treasury hat, and you'll appreciate this, is that the Exchequer makes a lot of money from cigarette duty. So the idea that you're going to bring in a ban, I mean, where are you going to get the revenue from? That's what a lot of officials will be thinking.
Do you think it'll happen?
Well, it's really interesting that it's been leaked to the front page of The Sun. I would assume that that is from somebody who's hostile to the plans, because that's why you would do that. The story, it's a brilliant story, by the way. The story says that there is cabinet resistance. It seems to be the business department, unsurprisingly, quite unhappy. Look, if Keir Starmer is really committed to it, it will happen.
Yep.
He has the political capital to be able to do it. What I'm not clear on is this an idea he is particularly pushing? Or is it just something that the officials have had in their back pocket for a little while and thought they might...
And are chucking it in at this
Yes.
point.
I mean, Keir Starmer's instincts, I would say, are probably more nanny state. In fact, he has said himself he will fully embrace the nanny state. So as far as his, you know,
I think his natural,
politics lie,
I think his
that's
natural inclination will be to step in and
But
ban.
we've done a snap poll on this. We asked you about 20 minutes ago if you think smoking should be banned in outdoor public areas like pub gardens, obviously children's play areas, outside big stadiums like Twickenham. Do you know what? 53% of you say, yeah, it should.
Well, we left the
47%
EU
said
on
no,
a
isn't it?
smaller margin
On a
than
smaller
that.
way
It's never
for
going to
that.
happen, right?
Yeah, well, look, keep voting on that poll if you can, and keep your thoughts coming in. Talking of the EU, front page of the Eye, elsewhere across all the papers as well. So Keir Starmer's going to have to give way on youth migration to get a softer Brexit, EU sources claim. And this kind of youth migration, is it part of the Erasmus scheme? And those
That was involved in it. That was involved
connecting
in
where
it.
you
Remind
can,
us what
for
the
a
Erasmus
younger...
scheme was.
That was for students. So essentially,
Yeah.
university students could go anywhere in the EU and
And,
spend a year, generally.
we could, UK could as well, and also the same with working as well, wasn't it, at that
Yes,
point?
that's right.
Now, nothing's been taken off the table, but certainly nothing's been pushed. But Keir Starmer's clearly on a bit of a European tour at the moment to try and negotiate.
Right, exactly.
better
And this, I think this is where the youth mobility issue, and universities in particular, is where he's going to find his first point of tension, because, as you can tell from that story, European leaders really want it. And the reason for that is there are lots of European students who want to study in the UK, partly to get their English better, also because we have great universities.
And lots of universities want them.
Of course,
Well,
yeah,
at
that's
the
right.
moment
They're
they
very
want them
high-paying,
because
and they, you know...
because they pay. But what European countries want is for them not to have to pay for their
Exactly
fees.
right. Exactly.
So they want them to have the same fees as Brits. Now that would cripple university finances. They would have to find the money from elsewhere.
Right.
So Starmer's got the universities in his ear saying, you can't do this.
Yeah.
We need this money. They've got to be treated as foreign students.
Let's go to the apex of the cynicism about Keir, the discard side, as it were, of Keir Starmer's comments and what he's been doing about Europe over the last 48 hours. Let's go to Nigel Farage. This also wraps up what the Prime Minister said at his Rose Garden press conference. This is Farage's extremely cynical response.
Well, the Prime Minister is saying he wants to reset the relations with the EU ahead of a treaty renegotiation next year. Now, whilst he says we won't rejoin the single market or the customs union, what is clear is he's lining us up for regulatory alignment. He's lining us up for very close defence integration, despite the fact the Germans spend far too little on defence, and many American NATO chiefs would be worried. And I just fear we're really heading for Brino, Brexit in name only, under a Labour government.
Has he got a point?
Look, I think he's got a point in terms of, and I've always thought this, they're never going to say we're going to rejoin the EU.
Of course.
But what they'd be dead in the water if they said that. But what they can do is essentially, as Nigel says, soften the ground, and they'll rename all the things that they want to join. So it won't be the customs union. It'll be something like, you know, the goods exchange agreement or something. There'll be a phrase which they can come up with, which essentially is the same thing as what we left. But I think some things they can never go back to.
Would that be such a bad thing? I mean, you know, I'm not making a political point about in or out of the referendum, but we've all seen, haven't we, however people voted, that there have been a lot of problems
There have been some problems, but actually if you look at just the broad GDP numbers, they're higher here than they were or have been in France and Germany. So it's not true to say that, to me, to my way of thinking, that somehow if we'd been there, everything would be much better.
Kieran?
The main economies there are growing slower, more slowly than we are.
The problem I have with Nigel Farage's comments is this idea of badging this as Brexit in name only, because in the run-up to the Brexit referendum, we were told by supporters of Brexit, the UK will stay not only in the customs union, but in the common market. And this idea that somehow re-entering some of these agreements is reversing the central premise of Brexit. This wasn't what was promised.
OK, so it's just that it couldn't be achieved in the negotiations after the referendum.
I think what happened is the debate just got shifted and shifted and shifted.
So that's what happens. Both sides. I mean, I remember this as an MP. I remember thinking this is 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Right.
But during the course of the debate, everything got more polarised and radicalised. Yeah. So that people who, before the referendum, were Brexiteers and saying, well, we can handle a free trade of goods, essentially, suddenly became, hard Brexiteers.
Right.
And the kind of people who are kind of, sort of on balance, just Remainers, suddenly became total enthusiasts and totally religious about Remain. Right. And that's what happens. The polarisation made things much more tricky. And then, of course, I think the fundamental original sin of it was the 2017 election, where we went into the election thinking that we were going to get an increased majority, and then we lost our majority. So we had spent 2 years in a House of Commons that didn't have a majority. And we didn't get anywhere, really, frankly, in those 2 years.
I mean, you essentially had a lot of people saying they were free trade, enthusiasts, then going through Brexit and saying, well, we need to leave the single market, our closest trading partner. And that has had an impact on the British economy. So I think that, this idea that, well, if you want to unwind some of that, that's going back on Brexit, or that's doing Brexit in name only. That's not where the debate was.
So I accept the fact that...
So what are the things that make it pure Brexit in both your eyes?
There are a whole bunch of things.
It shouldn't be unrolled under any circumstances.
So for a lot of people, and for me, this was a big consideration, was the European Court. Not the Convention on Human Rights, but the actual European Court. And that was a big issue. And obviously the court had nothing to do, or much less to do, with the economic arrangements. Something to do.
So that would have to stay
That was the thing.
As far as you're concerned.
The single market became a thing that we wanted to leave because we wanted to coordinate with other markets. Now, I don't think we've been that successful in that.
Right.
But that was the argument that I found very compelling, is that if you take Europe as a whole, it's not growing very fast. If you look at the rest of the world, if you look at America, if you look at Southeast Asia, if you look at other countries and areas, continents, they're growing much faster.
So why haven't we got those?
Well, that was a function of politics. I mean, I was involved in that. We didn't get a majority. So the worst thing that happened, as far as this whole debate is concerned, from my point of view, was the fact that when Theresa May called the election 2017, her phrase was "strengthen my hand." So the whole idea was that we would strengthen her hand by getting more Conservative MPs, so that we could get through legislation through the House of Commons to get Brexit done. What happened was the opposite. So instead of actually increasing the majority she had a slight majority. We ended up losing the majority.
Yeah. Right.
And the House was completely divided, and there was no clear voice.
So do you think Theresa May's deal would have been better than what we ended up with?
So it wasn't that different. I mean, the thing that Theresa May's deal, the whole issue with the Irish protocol and the border down the Irish Sea, all of that came as a consequence of this Parliament not having a majority. I think she could have been much tougher. I mean, that was the whole point of strengthening my hand. She could have been much tougher negotiating with them if she had a commanding majority in the House.
OK, another front-page story this morning, fuel tax likely to be going up. I mean, when Dream recorded Only Things Can Only Get Better, they probably didn't know that they were issuing an anthem for the Labour Party. Perhaps they should go back into the studio, a bit like Oasis might do, and record something called Things Can Only Get Worse. Because that's where we do seem to be headed.
Yeah. You know, I was sitting in the Downing Street garden the other day when Keir Starmer gave his
the conference.
For the press conference. It's a beautiful day. The sun was shining. The garden looks spectacular. Keir Starmer comes out, he's just won an election, and there's 50 people that he's met on the campaign trail. I think we can broadly assume they're supportive of the Labour Party. The mood was quite bouncy, and, you know, everybody was in good spirits. And then he started talking. I just thought, this is incredible for a Prime Minister who's just won an election.
Yeah, it is
this much doom and gloom. Right,
I think it's obviously a strategy. They want to sort of prepare
get us
the
over
world.
the worst.
Exactly,
but I'm
not sure it's the right
news out there.
I'm not sure it's going to work in terms of popularity, because a lot of people have
Does he
massive
need
hope.
to be popular right now, though?
Well, he needs to carry people with him. I mean, every politician needs to carry people.
We need a bit of hope.
Exactly. I mean, that was the Obama mantra, hope.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
And people feel that they want to. They don't want to get up in the morning and think, "Oh, what's the point?"
Yeah.
They want to get up in the morning and think, with a spring in their step, say, "Look, we can do this. We can actually
So what do we
improve
think?
things."
Seems to be there's a consensus that they're going to come after pensions, they're going to come after capital gains tax, they're going to come after inheritance tax, and now
Thames Water's saying fuel bills are going to have to go up, otherwise we're going back.
And now we're saying that it looks as if petrol is going to be more expensive at the pumps. Is that right?
I'm not. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think the quote is a lot less strong than some of the coverage suggests. So what actually happened was, Keir Starmer's in Berlin at the moment. He's surrounded by the press pack. I've been on these trips. I know what it's like. You're looking for any story you can get. You get limited
You've
time
been on
with the
these
Prime
trips to the
Minister.
other side.
You know, you have to...
And you're trying to dodge your question.
Yeah,
They're trying to
exactly.
dodge our questions,
Yeah.
and we're trying to pin them down. And what's happened is somebody has asked him, can you rule out putting up fuel duty? And he has fallen back on his stock answer, which is we won't put up national insurance, income tax or VAT.
That's right.
But didn't rule it out.
Didn't rule out
So the press says,
because he
you
doesn't.
haven't ruled this out.
You haven't
Of
ruled
course,
this
he hasn't explicit, because you can't write the budget 3 months before
Does
it
seem
happens.
to be a frenzy, an absolute frenzy building to the budget. And maybe that's a clever strategy, because if it isn't as bad as the front pages of every newspaper has said for the last month, then it may not be okay.
I think you're 100% right.
Yeah.
I think they're doing expectations management.
Right.
They're saying, look, we're going to really come after you. We're going to put up your taxes. It's going to be a nightmare. And then in the event, when they put them up a little bit, everyone will be kind of, thank God, you know, it wasn't as bad as they said that it would be. So I think there's a lot of expectations management.
Makes you feel a bit manipulated, doesn't it?
But it happens every budget. I mean, you've
But
done
we
this
didn't
as
do
well.
it. That was our problem. We didn't, because we were kind of launched into it, and we proceeded at the rate
You
of
didn't
knots.
You didn't manage anyone's expectations
so
at all.
sort of, you know, we could have done a bit more of that. But it happens a lot. It happens a lot.
OK, I've got a list here of 15 items of foodstuff. I want to just take a few out here. Angel Delight, wagon wheels, flying saucers, Arctic roll, curly whirlies. What do they all have in common? Well, I'll tell you,
1970s.
they're a part of a new survey. It's kind of into Proustien moments, basically.
I had some I prepared earlier for you.
Flavours of either
if you need
food
it.
or drink, which instantly
I like Coca-Cola bottles.
transport us back to our childhoods.
Yeah,
We
sure.
can do it in an instant. And the top of the list is Angel Delight, apparently. Does that ring a bell with you?
Would you like a bowl? Strawberry or butterscotch? Personally, I think it's got
think
to be
strawberry's better.
butterscotch.
I'll
You
go
like strawberry?
butterscotch,
Yeah, I'll
for
have
sure.
Oh, you're going.
Yeah,
there you
yeah,
go. There you go.
that's
Grab
yours.
yourself a
I mean, I
sweet.
haven't eaten one of these
Let-
since about 1984.
I haven't. I
What
think
was he?
I've had one for
What was he
20,
young
30
Kwasi
years.
Kwarteng like? Did he
Well, I was
tuck
eating,
in?
yeah.
Were you
we had
eating
to.
that?
We had to
Were
eat this
you?
stuff.
Do you know what
Yeah.
Kwasi loves? He loves spam and corned
You like-
beef. Those are
You like
his...
that? You want butterscotch? Oh, you have strawberry.
Don't get me
Okay.
started on spam.
You love
I mean,
spam?
Do you hate
I'm
it?
the only person. No, I'm the only person I know who loves spam.
No, I like it.
Give me
I
a
like
spam
it.
sandwich any moment of the day, and I'll eat it. I adore
Oh my
spam.
God, that's so good.
Is it?
These are nostalgia foods from the 1970s. You're right. This isn't what I grew up with.
What did you grow up on then? What would do it for
Ready
you?
break. I remember Ready break.
Ready
bread?
bread,
Okay.
ready
I think
bread.
you're right. I think the butterscotch is better.
Butterscotch Angel Delight. So that is the number one thing. Maybe
right.
you've got others, by the way. Maybe something brings back childhood to you. Do let us know. Salt and shake crisps. Do you
Oh,
I
remember
do
them
remember
that.
Saturday?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
You
Love a bit
actually
of
ripped
that.
open, and I remember it when the salt wasn't in a kind of a proper little kind of packet. It was in a blue screw of paper.
Yeah,
And you
really?
do you remember that? You unscrewed the blue, and then you shook it.
And all
I
the
used
salt
to
would
love
gather at the
those.
bottom and it would never actually
So-
hit the crisps. And then you'd run
You
your
had to
finger
shake
down.
it.
It's amazing how, I mean, it's so sweet. I mean, I remember wagon wheels.
Oh, yeah.
I used to eat them a lot as a kid, but the thought of eating it now just...
Go
gives-
on.
No, I couldn't eat. I
Put
couldn't
one
bother.
there.
Tempt him.
I've got a
If you
slightly
have
different...
a curly whirly, you won't be able to speak about anything for the
but
next 2 minutes.
you know,
They're very chewy.
I've got sugar issues now, which I didn't have,
course, yeah.
30 years ago.
I just wanted to say, did you see that extraordinary accident between Cirencester and Stroud on Tuesday, just coming up to rush hour with the pilot? Credible images that have now come out of the two pilots who survived. Let's have a little look. Yeah.
Amazing.
So it was a light aircraft and it crashed down on a busy road and they came out of it okay.
It's a Nigel Farage moment, isn't it?
Well, I
Nigel
think he was
Farage
much
one.
more serious than
Nigel
that.
Farage.
Oh,
He
yeah.
was.
He had serious back problems after
was.
that. These two apparently
He won't
have
go in a
minor
light
injuries.
plane, and he wouldn't go into a plane like that.
No.
No, well, you wouldn't, would you?
No. But my goodness, and what it must have been for those driving along the road as well, to see that coming crashing on down.
And the other, a completely non-fatal accident, but God knows what it must have been like to be the parents, was this little boy who was in, a museum in Italy. And there was a 3,000-year-old vase that's been there for the last 35 years, and they deliberately don't put it behind glass and they don't put it behind barriers because they feel that people should be able to get quite close to the history.
That's crazy.
And the little boy tugged it.
Yeah.
He wanted to see what was in it.
To see what was inside.
I think that's the museum's fault, right? I mean, how dumb is that?
They were very good about it.
They were.
It was their fault.
They brought him in for a special tour.
It's their fault.
And the dad said the absolute horror that he couldn't quite take in that it was son that did it.
Yeah.
We've all been like that as a parent.
You're just looking at something thinking that can't be true.
I can't
happen.
Oh my gosh, that's happened in the first place. Oh my gosh, my child is responsible. Oh no, it's kind of a summer holiday lecture, that is it?
Well, we'll leave you to take your angel delight away with you.
Oh wow!
Reminisce on times past.
I just have to. I haven't had this in years, and it's delicious.